everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Lynn Lowdown. I'm your host, Wesley Days, and today we're sitting down with Senator Brendan Crighton. Hello, sir. How are you?
How you doing, Wesley? Thanks for having me here today.
It's so good to have you here. I want to start with Massachusetts coronavirus, the dealing with, the reopenings of a lot of the infrastructure in Massachusetts. I want to go straight into that. Do you think that Massachusetts is moving too fast in terms of coronavirus reopenings?
Do you mind just repeating that question?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the question is, do you think that Massachusetts is moving too fast in the reopening process?
So, I mean, as a legislator, we're really trying to listen to our communities and recognizing that each community is facing different challenges. I think the most recent, the biggest probably issue that folks are grappling with is around the school reopenings. And Governor Baker and his administration have more or less given communities the ability to decide how to approach that. I agree with Superintendent Tutwiler's approach in terms of starting remotely, given the high caseload in Lynn and our aging infrastructure, which speaks to a much larger issue of how we educate our students overall in Massachusetts and in Lynn. But certainly, I don't think we could have returned to a full or even a hybrid mode at this point. So, I think that's a sensible approach. I can't speak for all communities in this front in terms of what's best for each individual district. There are a lot of calls right now for us to have kind of a blanket approach and say, to the schools, either return or not return for everyone. I just think that each district is so different in their student body and in their infrastructure that it made sense to provide recommendations and then work with the schools to implement the policy that was best for them. As far as reopening, I agree with the phase-in approach. Some people say we're going too fast. Many say we're going too slow. I think you have to base all these decisions on data, and we want to continue to make sure that our testing is as robust as possible, and that we're making sure that we're making sensible and responsible decisions. Obviously, we're facing a public health crisis, but also an economic crisis as well. And it's a challenge, unprecedented. We've never faced this before in our generation, certainly.
Absolutely. So on June 25th, you voted in favor of the Patients Act Up bill. Can you talk to me about what that bill is about and why you joined in favor of the bill?
So is this the healthcare and telemedicine, the patients first?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think we recognize that the world has changed considerably. While in Massachusetts, we consider ourselves at the forefront of medicine, recognizing that if it's not safe for folks to be able to go into a hospital or to a healthcare setting, making sure that we have the most robust telehealth program in the country. And part of that comes down to reimbursements and making sure that it works out financially for all those involved, and making sure that everyone has access. So the bill, it hasn't been signed into law. Both the Senate and the House have different versions. Today I kind of came onto the show with the expectation that I would be able to give this long list of legislative accomplishments and things that are signed into law. Unfortunately, I think largely because of COVID, we have extended our legislative session. So a number of these bills have passed both branches, but the different versions haven't been reconciled yet. I can certainly dive into some of those, recognizing that none of them or most of them aren't finished products, unfortunately. We've extended our session until December 31st at this point.
So, talking about some of the accomplishments, because you have had a few accomplishments while you have been in office. Recently, you worked with Senators Sonia Diaz, Joe Comfort, Representatives Bud Williams, Mindy Combe, and China Taylor on an act to make Juneteenth a state holiday. Can you tell me what it was like to work with your fellow members of, in office on this project and how it came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, I think most folks do at this point, we have a very robust organization here in Lynn and on the North Shore Juneteenth Association. So a number of years ago, we started working with those folks, many of whom I've, known throughout my life in different areas. And, they really they inspired me, but they also informed me, really. I mean, I knew of the holiday or of the significance of the day, but they certainly educated me and I think raised awareness across the city in the North Shore. So they were kind of my inspiration, and I didn't want to rush ahead and just file an amendment or file a bill and say we're doing this holiday. So I reached out to members of the Black and Latino caucus and said, hey, this is what I'm thinking of, and it turned out a few other people had similar ideas. So it was great to kind of create that collaboration. We filed the bill, but oftentimes in policymaking, the bill you file doesn't pass by itself. You can jump onto different pieces of legislation. With a supplemental budget, which I would like to dive into a little bit, coming out, we saw an opportunity there, and it was quickly passed and signed into law. Normally, it takes years of advocacy to get this done, but everything's moving a little faster here in COVID. And I think, I think the timing and the sense of urgency around racial justice and raising awareness on these things certainly helped as well. So, looking forward to working with North Shore Juneteenth and other stakeholders to make sure that, while this is a holiday now, that we are celebrating in the most appropriate way and in the best way to raise awareness for everybody. But part of that bill too, a lot of the stuff we're doing on COVID right now, it's around funding, right? Organizations are stretched thin across the board, and certainly for personal protective equipment, which early on we struggled greatly with. So we added an additional $350 million for PPE, $44 million for the community tracing collaborative to make sure we're utilizing our tests in the best way possible to make sure we're limiting the spread. Housing has been a huge issue that we face, and we were able to pass an eviction moratorium and foreclosure moratorium early on, which I had led the conference committee on that bill. But the moratorium helps the current public health crisis and keep people in their homes. But moving forward, we need to make sure there's a robust system in place for rental assistance. So we put an additional $20 million, which is no small chunk of change, for the RAFT program. That program helps low-income and middle-income families make rent and mortgage payments. We put $13.5 million to our local housing authorities, who are also stretched very thin at this time and dealing with their own issues around rental payments, and over $10 million for homeless shelters as well. $82 million for child care providers, including emergency child care, accessible health care, another $85 million. And then in particular in Lynn, recognizing how hard hit we were, we as a delegation felt that we needed to fight for very Lynn specific funding. And we did so to the tune of $200,000, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is, there weren't a ton of earmarks in this bill. So that, would help with interpretation services and personal contact tracing, and also for nursing as well. So we want to make sure that Lynn and all my communities in the district have the resources to get the job done under very difficult circumstances.
Absolutely, absolutely. And talking about Lynn was recently deemed kind of a high-risk area in the state of Massachusetts. Speaking to your constituents now, what do you want them to do, to make sure they stay safe? Is there anything that you would like to, point out to them to make sure that they're going throughout their day with caution and making sure they're staying safe?
Yep, absolutely. And, it was originally, I think, only 4 communities that were identified in the red. And since then, it's expanded to 11, including some of our neighboring North Shore communities. So, Lynn's had its challenges, but we're not alone. I think Mayor McGee's done a tremendous job, as have city officials, to really stress. I mean, I think early on they came out and recognized this was going to be a public health crisis, and were very responsible with some of the restrictions they placed. I think at this point, you still see folks out and about in groups with not wearing masks. Obviously, I think that's the easiest thing we all can do to help out. But also, we've seen an uptick recently because of outdoor gatherings where it's safer outdoors certainly, but not if you're in crowds of greater than 50 people. So I think following the restrictions as hard as we can, recognizing, everyone's going stir crazy. We're trying to find some joy family and friends during the summertime. Obviously, we want people to get outside and to get fresh air and exercise, but recognizing, we still have a long fight ahead of ourselves here. And as we start to see more and more upticks, I hope people are realizing that we can't stop being vigilant against this pandemic.
Absolutely. So you said earlier during our conversation that, the session for Congress is still going on and has been, going through till December 31st of this year. And you were saying how, many things, though you want to have them accomplished and they're going through the House and through the Senate right now, that it's still going to take more time. Can you talk to me about some of those future projects or some of the projects that you're trying to get done right now and pass through legislation to make it a law?
Absolutely. So a couple of the bigger bills that have been out there for quite some time now, we have a transportation bond bill. Anyone that takes public transportation or drives on our roads recognizes that we have fallen way behind in terms of our transportation infrastructure. A lot of what a bond bill typically does is it allows for spending in certain major capital projects. The one that we've been most focused on the North Shore is called the Environmental Justice Corridor. So last year in the fall, a wide range of stakeholders, from elected officials to community groups to business organizations to students, anyone you could think of, came to the Fiscal Management and Control Board, which is kind of the MBTA governing structure. And we made a strong case that while we're just a short distance away from Boston, and certainly a community with a number of low-income, middle-income families that can't afford that $7 one-way trip on the commuter rail. So folks are forced to go on the road, to drive down to Wonderland, to then pay for parking if you're lucky enough to get it, hop onto a train, and then get into Boston that way. So we felt like it was an environmental and economic justice issue, looking to the communities of Revere, Chelsea, and Everett as well that have similar demographics. Really for most of my constituents, the only thing they'll ever know from our commuter rail, which does service Lynn, but the only thing they'll ever know is really the clacking of the tracks, the diesel exhaust from our trains, and the congestion and, just a gridlock really all along the stretch of 1A there. So we fought hard for electrification of the line, increased frequency, and I think most importantly, putting our fare structure more in line with that of a subway system or with the 1A that's offered, further south from us. So that was approved. I don't want to say I was shocked that it was approved, but we were named one of 3 communities to be a priority as part of their rail transformation. So anyways, back to the question at hand. On the transportation bond bill, it's great that we got that approval from the Fiscal Management Control Board, but we need to authorize the money for it. And I don't want to give out figures. The House had one version, we had a different version. It still needs to be reconciled, but both branches were able to get a significant amount of funding to at least say there is money there. It's borrowed money, but we authorize the administration to move forward on that, and we hope that will be a big step forward. Additionally, I don't want to focus too much on just any one bill. The economic development bond bill was another piece that is still being debated. One issue I just want to highlight in there is around housing. We're in Massachusetts. We're facing a housing crisis. We're producing less than half the housing we did back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And as a result, costs are through the roof. We have some of the highest rents and the highest cost of home ownership in the entire country. We're certainly experiencing that in Greater Boston and even in Lynn, which was always considered to be an affordable place to live. But the rents are sky high. And a lot of that has to do with restrictive zoning laws that have been put in place over the years that limit a community's ability to build more housing. So the amendment that I had filed as the housing chair to the bond bill, which was passed unanimously, would lower the threshold for zoning decisions from a 2/3 supermajority to a simple majority vote. To me, if you asked me, 10 years ago what that meant, I would probably be scratching my head. But having been on the council and we accomplished zoning reform, really seeing how difficult it is. It's difficult to get to 2/3 vote on any matter. In a democracy, typically used to a simple majority vote. So this would make it easier for communities if they want to build inclusionary zoning or multifamily zoning or mixed use or accessory dwelling units. It would make it easier. There's so many projects that have been held up because while they have the majority support of either their council or town meeting, they can't get to that 2/3 to do the right thing for their community. So I'm really hopeful that this gets, in conference committee gets worked out. There are a few other pieces in there just to highlight. I think setting housing production goals is important, and the governor did that in his bill. But we went a step further and said that for the 427,000 units that we want to get built by 2040, we want 20% of those to be affordable. And of that, we want 10% of that to be extremely low income at 30% average median income. So we want to build, we want to have a diverse housing stock, but we can't forget about the affordable component as well, given the crisis that's been here for far too long. So those are two bills that are still being conferenced out. Police reform is obviously another big one that's
absolutely
been on the forefront for everyone. And, again, the bills were different. They're not completely different. I think some of the major changes that we did are creating really statewide systems for use of force, prohibiting chokeholds, encouraging or mandating de-escalation tactics, limiting some of the crowd control, things that are used in terms of tear gas or rubber bullets, basically requiring de-escalation as always being the first thing. And a lot of the departments that we've heard from, police departments we've heard from, already have these on their books locally, which, we think is great. And I think the city of Lynn has had a lot of these already in place, including the right to intervene by an officer. So if, a partner, or if an officer sees another officer acting with excessive use of force, he or she has to intervene. A lot of that's already on the books, right? So we're not pointing and saying, Lynn or any other, specific district, you aren't doing these things. We're saying if these are best practices and everyone kind of agrees that these are common sense things we need to do, then let's make it mandatory across the state. I mean, why should we have this piecemeal policies across when these things I think would work across any city or town? So that's one piece of it. The bigger piece is a bill that the governor proposed, though our version differs slightly. Would require licensure and certification of police officers. We're one of only 6 states in the country that doesn't have a statewide certification process. So we thought it was important to have that in there to make sure that it's an independent panel that can certify and decertify officers if it sees fit, and to investigate misconduct. Again, I try to remind folks, because this is obviously a very hot button issue, that there are many, many things that, at least in Lynn in particular, we're doing very well. Statewide, I think there needs to be reform. I think most folks agree with that. But obviously, change is difficult, and I'm hoping that this conference committee can resolve our differences soon and get this bill to the governor's desk. There's been a ton of confusion around the issue of qualified immunity. It's still, the House had a different version than the Senate did, but the long and the short of it, we don't get rid of qualified immunity in this bill. I know folks at the national level are all of our Congress folks have voted on this, as well as there are a number of senators that are pushing for getting rid of qualified immunity. Our bill just says that you would lose qualified immunity. Sorry, are you breaking up?
No, I was just about to.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. I was about to reach in and say, can you speak to
sorry, go ahead.
The viewers about what qualified immunity is?
Yeah, so it would take me 5 hours to talk to fully articulate it here today, but basically qualified immunity is for almost all public servants. Essentially, if while it's both done at the federal and state level, and it deals with civil rights violations. So this isn't your run-of-the-mill, you're performing a job and you have an accident. Like so in instance for a police officer, if you're, say you're you're going to the scene of an accident and you crash your car into someone, or say that there was an accident during CPR and someone got hurt. That's a different set of laws. It's dealing with tort cases. It's different. This is if you violate someone's civil rights, which is, excessive use of force in most cases. So I think that's a big misunderstanding there, is that, we're hearing that officers wouldn't be able to do their job at all if you take away qualified immunity. We're not talking about accidents on the job. That's going to happen in any profession, and we certainly do not want anybody to be sued civilly on that, and though they still can be under existing law. This is qualified immunity for, again, it would be excessive force in most instances. And our bill would say that you would only lose qualified immunity is if you, as the officer or as the public servant, knew what you were doing in that moment was breaking the law. So it's not even whether or not you broke the law, it's whether or not you knew you were doing it. We don't want to, again, have any officer hesitate while they're doing their work. We want them to know what the standards are. I should also say, though, that the biggest misconception out there that I heard from so many folks was that, you could lose your home, or you could, by being sued civilly, you could be held financially responsible. That's not the case. Currently, right now in Massachusetts and across the country, cities and towns indemnify their public employees. So the city or town would be paying. It would not be on you. We're not trying to put anyone's home or anyone's livelihood in jeopardy by any means. So, and I know there's some people that think we should completely abolish qualified immunity, and that's fine. I guess this is a very confusing explanation, but I would say that it speaks to, one of the difficulties around this bill, and when you're making big changes, certainly sometimes it's hard to sum it up, and that's my son yelling in the background, so I apologize.
No worries. You did a great job summing that up. That was really good. I want to talk about...
would say, can I just want real quickly?
Yes.
For folks that have concerns on the police reform bill, call my office. I want to talk to you. Email us. We want to talk to you. So 617-722-1350 or brendan.crighton@masenate.gov. I want to speak with you directly as your senator. Facebook's great for getting the word out there on different things. It's also one of the biggest sources of misinformation around. So talk to me. I want to hear from you.
Absolutely. So, kind of to sum up and wrap everything up here, what do you hope for the future? What bills do you want to get passed in the future? I know that we were speaking about things that are on their way to being passed. Is there anything that you want to start in the House or in the Senate right now that you would hope to get passed during your term as senator?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the bigger bills that we haven't passed in either branch, but we have moved along in the process is the Work and Family Mobility Act. So that would provide the opportunity for undocumented immigrants to earn a driver's license just like anybody else would. It's a bill that I have sponsored and has built a ton of support across a wide range of stakeholders, from local community groups, obviously immigrant advocacy groups, businesses, folks in education and healthcare, really across the game, in law enforcement as well. The major city chiefs have endorsed our bill. So it has a ton of support. It's just, again, under COVID, we had such a restricted timeline. It was hard to get, as you can see, the long list of things we haven't finished yet. I'm hoping that moving forward, we're able to get this bill passed. Someone's ability to drive has nothing to do with their citizenship. There are plenty of people right now that aren't citizens of Massachusetts that already can legally drive. We've seen many other states, not just Democratic states, these are Republican states, border states as well, that have passed similar legislation. And you see decrease in accidents, decrease in hit and runs. It's an issue of equity too, especially in times of a pandemic, when many of our frontline workers are from the immigrant community, and many undocumented or a family of undocumented immigrants. And we're saying hey, thanks so much for your work on the front lines, but to get there, go break the law and drive. It just doesn't make any sense. Whether folks need to get to school, to a medical appointment, to work, anywhere at all. We don't have a public transportation system in Massachusetts that can get people to where they need to go easily. So people are going to drive, and it's heartbreaking to talk to many of these families, and the stress added on during a pandemic and an economic crisis that, any one of them could put themselves in jeopardy of being deported and losing their families. So it's heartbreaking. We're going to continue to work on that. That's probably the biggest one that, I can think of offhand, but, there's a ton of work to do. And I think, in terms of, new revenues, I think we're going to need to take a closer look at that. We're looking at $6 billion deficit that we're coming up to this fiscal year. And it could be worse next year if the federal government doesn't continue to provide stimulus money as we get through this. So $6 billion, it's easy to just kind of roll off the tongue to say, but when you dive into that, think of all the programs that are going to get cut. Think of all the social services, all the safety nets, how many people are going to be affected by that. So I'd like to look to a progressive revenue source to hopefully ease the pain a little bit. But we'll be debating our budget too. That's probably the biggest thing. I didn't even mention that. We weren't able to pass a budget this year because we don't know how much money we have to do so. So we passed temporary budget after temporary budget. We did commit this fiscal year to level funding our municipalities with local aid, as well as Chapter 70, which goes to education funding. So that was a huge commitment. I don't know that it will be there again next year, but for the time being, at least we provided that relief and certainty to our districts. But I rambled too much, Wesley. I'm sorry. I don't let you get a word in.
Senator Crighton, it was absolutely amazing to hear. It's great to, hear the information from elected officials and to get the word out. So thank you so much for coming on the Lynn Lowdown today. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been another edition of the Lynn Lowdown. I'm your host, Wesley Days. Have a good day, everyone.